welcome to this special edition of Middle East Now. I'm Laura Sellier, and we will go straight to our top story this hour. Well, people in this part of the world are still digesting the news of Donald Trump's victory in the US election. The president-elect takes office in January. And from Egypt to Qatar to Saudi Arabia, Arab leaders have been on the phone with Trump to offer their congratulations. But it was Israel's Prime Minister, Benjamin Netanyahu, who beat them all to make the first call. Our Guy Azriel has the story.
Mr. President, the citizens of Israel are waiting for you with open arms.
The ties between Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu and President-elect Donald Trump may be a rare political partnership that has led to a series of extraordinary achievements in ties between Israel and the US. But when it comes to these two gentlemen, nothing is taken for granted. On Wednesday, Netanyahu became the first international leader to congratulate the next president of the United States and his wife. Dear Donald and Melania Trump, congratulations on history's greatest comeback. Your historic return to the White House offers a new beginning for America and a powerful recommitment to the great alliance between Israel and America. This is a huge victory.
We are informed that President Trump has decided to move the United States Embassy to Jerusalem.
The recognition of Jerusalem as the capital of Israel, the transfer of the American embassy, recognition of Israeli sovereignty over the Golan Heights, the deal of the century plan to resolve the Israeli-Palestinian conflict, and of course, the signing of the Abraham Accords are, among other reasons, the direct result of the special relationship and cooperation between these two leaders.
President couldn't have been more explicit in his support for our right of self-defense. Thank you.
Unlike Netanyahu's frosty and tense relationship with Barack Obama or his complicated ties with Joe Biden, the ties between the Israeli Prime Minister and the new president-elect are seen as warm and personal.
President Trump is a very great friend of our country, a leader who has done things that haven't been done before. Decisions that should have been taken before by the virtue of justice and truth.
But as in any relationship, and especially one with Donald Trump, moments of crisis may not only cloud the ties between the two leaders, but also adversely affect the cooperation between the two countries.
Congratulations, President Joe Biden, on your historic inauguration.
One of the peaks of tension between the two men came 4 years ago when Netanyahu called to congratulate Joe Biden on his victory in the presidential election against Trump. Trump, who refused to admit defeat, was disappointed by what he saw as betrayal. Another low point in the relationship between the two men came when the commander of the Iranian Quds Force, Qasem Soleimani, was eliminated.
President Trump should be congratulated for acting swiftly, boldly, and resolutely against this terrorist in chief.
I'll never forget that Bibi Netanyahu let us down. That was a very terrible thing, I will say that. So we were disappointed by that, very disappointed, but we did the job ourselves, and it was absolute precision, magnificent, beautiful job. And then Bibi tried to take credit for it. That wasn't good. That didn't make me feel too good, but that's all right.
Despite the tensions and the disappointments between the two, it seems that Netanyahu has managed to find his way back to the heart of the 47th president. During a visit to the US in July, the two met for the first time since the post-election crisis, and what was seen as a public expression of support for Trump. Since then, and throughout the past several months, the relationship has been maintained.
So I had a very nice call with him. He called me up yesterday morning. We talked. I congratulated him on obviously doing a very good job, keeping Israel safe. He's doing very well. He calls me on occasion. I think he wants my views on things.
Ahead of Trump's 4 more years in office, and with Netanyahu's strengthened coalition, the relationship between these two is expected to play a major role in shaping the future of the Middle East in the coming years.
Well, here with me to talk a bit more about that, Ruth Wasserman-Land is a former member of the Knesset and research fellow at the Misgav Institute for Strategic Affairs. Great to have you with us, Ruth. Also with us in the studio, our Middle East correspondent, Ariel Saran. Hi there, Ariel. So, Ruth, they have had a tricky relationship in the past, haven't they? We might characterise it perhaps as frenemies. What are your thoughts, your expectations for a second Trump presidency?
I think that there was a huge hope and aspiration in the current Israeli coalition headed by Benjamin Netanyahu that Trump would score the victory that he did. And I think that the relationship will be very, very close, except that if and when the red lines or the boundaries will be signified by President-elect Trump, I think that the Prime Minister of the State of Israel will be there to listen, whether it's convenient or a little bit less. So the boundaries will be more felt than the previous administration.
And the initial message from the Trump administration that Israel is getting is wrap up your wars before I come to power on January 20th.
Yes, it could be a good thing, and it could be a little bit... it's a good thing in general. I think that it's giving the green light, understanding that it's needed, but also putting a time framework or, as I said before, a red line and a boundary. There is a limit to when you can do it, and the limit is January 20th when I come into office. So if you need to predetermine the current state of affairs vis-a-vis certain countries, do it sooner rather than later.
All right. So, Ariel, Prime Minister Netanyahu was the first world leader to call President Trump and congratulate him. Today, he's been having a conversation with Israel's president, Isaac Herzog.
Yeah, not head of state, but a significant leader in Israeli public life. President Isaac Herzog calling President-elect Trump to congratulate him, according to the readout by Herzog's office. He called him to congratulate him over his overwhelming election victory and return to the White House. In the call, Herzog emphasized the urgent need to secure the return of Israeli hostages who have been held captive by Hamas for over 400 days. In the readout from Netanyahu's office, the only policy issue that was stated was that they talked about the need to discuss Iran. So here, Iran not mentioned, but they're talking about the importance to deepen the ironclad alliance between the two nations, but obviously President Herzog emphasizing the issue of the hostages.
OK, all right. Thank you both. Well, let's switch to the north and the ongoing war with the Iranian-backed terrorist group Hezbollah. There has been a heavy exchange of fire today between Israel and Hezbollah, with the terrorist group firing some 40 rockets at the north of the country today. The IDF has been striking Hezbollah positions deep in Lebanon. Our Zach Anders is up in northern Israel with the latest for us now. Zach, what's happening?
Hi, Laura. Yeah, 40 rockets in one barrage into the Haifa area, 120 rockets in total, the IDF tells me. This is netting some really incredible images just north of Haifa, with impacts near a building and in a parking lot. Remarkably, no casualties reported in the north as a result of these pretty fiery scenes in the Haifa area. We do believe that, based on some conversations this afternoon, the weapons that were used in this attack into Haifa were more advanced rockets, more powerful rockets in this barrage. But again, at this point of the full-scale confrontation between Hezbollah and the IDF, it still does appear that their ability to fire rockets and missiles has been severely degraded at this point, and their arsenal, we're starting to note a wide variation in what they have been firing in comparison to the last year, indicating that they are trying to pull their resources from different areas, the surviving rockets and missiles that haven't been hit yet, and potentially dipping into their supply of some of their more coveted weapons that they have been holding, likely holding deep underground, securing, trying to keep for this direct confrontation, and now they're starting to fire some of these rockets that they had held on to for the duration of the last years, what I'm being told at this point. But again, no casualties reported as a result of this fire, much different than yesterday when we had an 18-year-old who was killed in an agricultural field here in the north, an 18-year-old Israeli teen. Also, an 85-year-old man was wounded by shrapnel. Today, the ambulance service here in the north says that multiple ambulances were damaged by some of the rocket impacts, but none of the ambulance staff were hurt. So a lot going on there, just purely from a perspective of what's being fired right now, but still some significant movement with UNIFIL, and we're tracking some movement with a potential diplomatic deal that could be made here, although certainly no major breakthrough has been announced publicly.
All right, Zach, thank you very much. Zach Andrews there with an update from the north. And a reminder, President-elect Trump has said he wants that war in Lebanon over by the time he is inaugurated on January 20th. Well, the focus now switching to who Trump will name to senior cabinet positions, such as Secretary of State and so forth. There was a pretty high turnover in personnel in Trump's last cabinet. He is known to prize loyalty very highly, and that's where family members could come into play. And Ariel, of course, will remember during Trump's first term in office, his son-in-law Jared Kushner played a pivotal role in securing the Abraham Accords, the normalization deals with the United Arab Emirates and other states. He might now have another favourite son-in-law, though.
Right, Laura. Kushner really led the Middle Eastern file for Trump in his first term. But indeed, we should look at another son-in-law in mind, but more precisely, a son-in-law's father. We're talking about Massad Boulos, father of Michael Boulos, Tiffany Trump's husband. Boulos is a Christian Lebanese businessman, and he's seen as one of the keys to the success of the Trump campaign in securing the Arab vote and winning Michigan, stuff like that. Now, Boulos said that he would assume the position of Amos Hochstein as the main negotiator with Lebanon on behalf of the American administration. But in an interview with Lebanon's MTV News, he didn't seem to limit that involvement to Lebanon alone. Let's take a listen.
Trump won the popular vote in a big red wave that sent a resounding message to Americans and the world. We dedicate this victory to Americans, Lebanese, and the entire world because Trump promised to end all the wars that are going on in Gaza, Lebanon, and Ukraine.
Do we know what his thoughts are on Hezbollah? Is he on the record talking about Hezbollah at all?
Not to the best of my knowledge, but as a Christian Lebanese expat, you can imagine that he is not a supporter. Look, Trump wants to see a swift end to the wars in the Middle East and in Ukraine. And in his first post-election speech to supporters, Trump said that he intends to end wars, not start them. And that's, I mean, for sure easier said than done, but it's what Trump ran on and how he increased his support in the Arab vote. And so it does make sense that he would try and make good on those promises. Here's Boulos again explaining the relationship between Trump and his campaign promises.
Trump is known for keeping his promises, and if he promises something, he will fulfill it. He promised to end the war and destruction in Lebanon and to rebuild it as well. He will start working on this immediately, and he has already begun work on it today, with phone calls and discussions with world leaders.
All right, so Massad Boulos, Lebanese Christian, who could be in line to be the new U.S. Special Envoy to Lebanon. So, Ruth, when I speak to Israelis, a lot of them are saying they are hopeful that Trump's circle will include people like Mike Pompeo, people who want to be tough on Iran. And there is more fear about the isolationists, people like Tulsi Gabbard and Tucker Carlson, people like that getting into Trump's inner circle. What are your thoughts?
I think that in general, a very strong hand is needed. And I think that the Trump circles will include those personalities that understand that much of the instability in the region is caused by two heads of the snake. There's more acknowledgement of one amidst his circles, and that's particularly the Islamic Republic of Iran, with all of its proxies, the Shiites in Iraq, the Shiite militias in Syria, Hezbollah in Lebanon, Hamas in Gaza, the West Bank that is a huge bed of chaos that is supported by Iran, Jordan that is trying to stay stable in the face of the Iranian activities there and so on, and the Houthis, of course, that have already said that they will stop their attacks on ships as soon as President-elect
I
Trump...
think that, not to contradict you, but I think that report has been discredited. I think
it has been discredited, but they did make some comments to sort of even hint. And the Houthis...
They're realising that an incoming Trump presidency might
Exactly.
Okay.
These are not people that are known to be, very logical, very stately, very stable seeking. And they have hinted that they will take care. And this is something that is needed currently in the Middle East and the region. And the question is, will they also put a hand on the issue of Qatar, because Qatar is supporting radical Islamist Sunni.
I want to ask you about that, Riz, because where do you think Trump stands on Qatar? Because he did just a couple of weeks ago have he had the Emir of Qatar over to Mar-a-Lago, didn't he? His residence in Florida, but he has also said... He was one of the first
callers too, Sheikh Tamim.
Exactly. Trump has also said he will deport jihadists, and we know that there has been a spotlight on American support for jihad and Qatar. So where do you see all of this going?
That's why I said there's a big question mark, because I don't know. And this is the big question. Qatar is supporting Muslim Brotherhood and the Hamas in many places in the world, but also just Canada is a good example where the number of memberships of Muslim Brotherhood is the highest in the world. Wow. This is not something that's only in the Middle East. And Qatar has bought its way and influence definitely in the United States of America, but throughout the West. And this is the big question. Where will he stand on the issue of Qatar? Because Iran, or rather the Islamic Republic of Iran, it's clearer.
Okay. Yeah,
just a quick remark. If President-elect Trump does decide to show a more forceful hand towards Qatar, he'll need to find a new house to the largest American base in the Middle East, which is
$7 billion worth of U.S. funding.
Real estate is in his wheelhouse.
Absolutely.
Okay, interesting one to
watch.
Big
question.
Definitely, lots of questions over that. Okay, well, meanwhile, the United Arab Emirates has sent hundreds of trucks of humanitarian aid to Gaza via Israel. This is a day after Israel said it had completed a polio vaccination campaign for children in Gaza. Israel's also facilitating the evacuation of hundreds of Gazans and their families for treatment abroad. But the international community, as always, is asking if Israel could do more. Joe Brown has this report.
For the first time since the Gaza war began over a year ago, hundreds of ill Gazans and their caregivers have left the enclave for treatment abroad.
The people are mentally exhausted. The situation in Gaza is completely shattered. It's unbearable, intolerable. People are tired. The healthcare system has been destroyed.
231 Gazans crossed the Kerem Shalom crossing into Israel before departing from Ramon Airport in Eilat to receive treatment in the United Arab Emirates or Romania. This move was carried out in conjunction with COGAT, the Israeli unit designed to oversee civilian policy in the West Bank and Gaza, along with the World Health Organization, the European Union and the UAE. It comes as Israel has come under growing criticism from international partners, including the US, for allegedly holding back aid into Gaza, sending in well under the agreed amount of 350 aid trucks to the Strip daily. The maximum amount Israel has sent in was 225 trucks a day in April, but in October, that number fell to an average of 13 trucks a day.
I think the situation is desperate, particularly in northern Gaza. It's northern Gaza has been strangled. The people are really, really suffering. There are not that many people left there, but those that are left there are really, really struggling.
Israel says there are issues with aid distribution into Gaza, including shipments getting hijacked from terrorists. But data from COGAT shows that aid deliveries have dropped by more than a third over the last month. Meanwhile, the IDF has said that over 1 million Gazan children have been vaccinated against polio, accounting for 90% of all Gazans under the age of 18. So with this, and the allowance of sick Gazans to leave the country for medical treatment, Israel is showing that it is still providing aid to Gazans. But, according to the international community, it is no way near enough.
So another example of the UAE really taking a leading role in getting humanitarian aid and assistance to people in Gaza. But let's go back to the impact of a second Trump presidency on the region. Ruth, you were in Cairo for many years. We know that Donald Trump wants value for money, and we also know that Egypt is a major recipient of US aid, as is Jordan. How do you think they'll be feeling in those two countries right now?
One of the things that need to be done in any kind of a new order in the Middle East is putting a lid on the incitement and the indoctrination in the region. So Egypt is not as bad as Jordan, and Jordan is almost as bad as Gaza, but just as bad as the West Bank. The incitement and the indoctrination in the official educational system, not to mention unofficial and, let's say, the leisure part of narrating what has to do with the West, the Jews, and Israel is absolutely horrific. And no matter how many terrorists are going to be killed, if that incitement does not stop, we have done nothing to change the region, nor to make it more stable. And stability equals money. What he needs to do, apart from stopping the wars, is to change the educational systems.
OK, Ruth, for now, thank you very much indeed. Well, Israel is braced for an Iranian response to its attack on Tehran's military sites last month. Iran has vowed to respond, and a squadron of F-15s are on their way from the US to support Israel in the event of that attack. Well, Israeli intelligence has for some time now said that Iran may use its militias in Iraq to attack Israel. And to talk about that, we're joined by Suzanne Kitaz, journalist and media analyst at the Jerusalem Center for Security and Foreign Affairs. Great to have you with us on the show, Susan. Thank you very much indeed. So, I mean, given what has happened to Hamas and Hezbollah, why would these Iraqi militias want to be next in line for a direct war with Israel?
Yeah, first of all, thank you so much for having me. I think it's really important to highlight that we all need to remember that it was the American who gave the keys of Iraq to the Iranian. I mean, before 2003, Iran had almost no influence in Iraq. Okay, going back to your question, these are Shia militias. They do not take order from the Iraqi Prime Minister or the Iraqi Ministry of Defense. They take order from the Iranian Supreme Leader, Ali Khamenei, and IRGC. So if Iran say to them, jump, they will jump. They don't give any damn what's the consequences of a possible attack. Will affect Iraq. I tell you that most Iraqi, they do not want a war with Israel. The Iraqi government has openly, have coming out to Iraqi media and said, we do not want to go to war with Israel. The problem is those militia who are backed and influenced by Iran.
So what can the Iraqi government do then? Because they are an ally of the United States. What can they do to prevent this from happening?
I don't think what they should do. I think what the Americans should do. The Americans should put more pressure on the Iraqi government to exercise control. I mean, Sudanese government, they've been saying for years, they out of control. They can't control these militias. I personally think they can control these militias, but they do not want to control these militias because more or less they have the ideological alliance with Iran. What the Americans need to do is to put more pressure on the Iraqi government.
Is there a role
on Iraqi Shia politicians?
Okay, is there a role for the semi-autonomous region of Iraqi Kurdistan in all of this? And can they count on support from the incoming President Donald Trump, do you think?
The Kurds, Americans are the Kurds allies. Kurds have been allies of America for decades. We can't get a worse administration like the one we had with Biden and Harris. But the problem is with the Kurds, they're not in charge of the Iraqi central government. They can't do much. Neither the Sunnis. Sunni politician against going to war with Israel, Kurds against that, Turkmani against that. The problem is the Shia. This is the problem. And a lot of people seem to forget that They've been in control since 2003. They very, they very pro-Iran. They take order from Iran. And I mean, in my opinion, if you ask me, the Americans are not doing enough. They're not doing enough at all. And I'm hoping the new, with the Trump's administration coming to power in January, that things will change.
Well, the direction things have been moving in is that the Americans want to pull their forces, the remaining forces, out of Iraq, and they would like to turn their back on Iraq and shut the door. Do you see that continuing under President Trump?
Oh, my God, that would be a disaster. That would be a disaster. It's like just giving all of Iraq to Iran. It would be a disaster. And I really hope they will not do it. I mean, for the Kurds, this will be like a suicide if the Americans will draw their troops. Because then Iran will have, the full control. And so would have Erdogan. We talk a lot about Iran. We talk a lot about Erdogan. But what about the Qatari role? The Qatari, they're playing a big role in all this. Maybe they're not supplying with the military, but they're supplying with the money. And this is where we have the problem. We have the problem now in the Kurdish region of Syria, where Qatar is playing a major role, and the international media, the Americans, the NATO, they're all giving a blind eye to it.
Well, Trump's policy is America first, so we will have to see how this all plays out and how that is seen to be in America's interest. Thank you very much indeed, Suzanne Cleetaz. Great to talk to you.
Thank you so much. Thank you.
Well, time for a short break. When we come back, Morocco is likely to welcome a second Trump presidency because during his first term, he recognised Moroccan sovereignty over the disputed Western Sahara region as part of the Abraham Accords. We'll have more on that next. Stay with us.
Shalom and welcome to Jewish World Weekly. I'm Khaled Ben David, and each week we're going to bring you the latest from the Jewish world, from politics to religion, entertainment to the latest trends, and everything in between. Join me each week as we explore the global Jewish diaspora. Don't miss Jewish World Weekly only on I-24 News.
Want to stay on top of the news no matter where you are?
Introducing I-24 News' brand new news website.
On our website, you'll find all the latest articles, interviews, and live broadcasts. Everything you need to know right at your fingertips, whenever you want it.
So what are you waiting for? Download the I-24 News app today.
This broadcast is brought to you by Israel Bonds, the most direct and impactful way to support Israel. Invest now at israelbonds.com. This broadcast is brought to you by Israel Bonds, the most direct and impactful way to support Israel. Invest now at israelbonds.com.
Welcome back. Donald Trump's return to power is likely to be welcomed in Morocco. The kingdom was one of the big winners in the Abraham Accords, which resulted in US recognition of Moroccan sovereignty over the disputed Western Sahara region, and Israel followed suit. Well, yesterday, Moroccans marked 49 years since the territory was annexed following the end of Spain's colonial rule. Our Alex Schloss has this report.
Morocco's King Mohammed VI does not oppose granting other states an outlet to the Atlantic Ocean through the disputed Western Sahara.
There are those who exploit the Sahara issue so as to secure access to the Atlantic Ocean. To them I say this: we do not refuse such as a prospect. As everyone knows, Morocco has proposed an international initiative to facilitate the Sahel countries' access to the Atlantic Ocean within the framework of partnership and cooperation, the aim being to achieve shared progress for the benefit of all peoples in the region.
The indirect proposal was made in a speech addressing the Moroccan people on Wednesday night on National Green March Day, a holiday commemorating the 1975 march of around 350,000 Moroccans into the Spanish-controlled territory of Western Sahara, some even waving American flags, inspired by the U.S.'s Manifest Destiny expansion. In recent years, Morocco has gone on a diplomatic blitz to solidify its claim on the region. In exchange for the Israel-Morocco Normalization Agreement as part of the Abraham Accords in 2020, the U.S. became the first country to officially recognize Moroccan sovereignty over the Western Sahara, with Israel following suit in 2023.
With the supervision of the senior advisor to the U.S. President, Mr. Jared Kushner, and head of Israel's National Security Council, Meir Ben Shabbat, this is a very important event because it follows the call that happened between His Majesty King Mohammed VI and U.S. President Trump in December. The call, as you may all remember, included historic and important decisions, whether the case of the Western Sahara and the U.S. acknowledgement that it is part of Moroccan lands, or the developments in the Middle East and reestablishing relations between Morocco and Israel.
In his final days in office after losing the 2020 election, then-President Donald Trump promised that the U.S. would open an American consulate in Dakhla, a city in the Western Sahara. And when Biden assumed office, construction of this diplomatic mission was paused without explanation. But with Trump returning to the presidency, Moroccan nationalists are hoping for more American support for Moroccan claims in the region. Morocco has long been in conflict with the separatist Polisario Front, supported by Algeria in the Sahara region, and after 49 years under de facto Moroccan control, the conflict is far from over.
Well, for more on that, we're joined now by Zineb Riboua, Morocco expert and research fellow at the Hudson Institute. Good to have you with us, Zineb. And what do you think Morocco can expect then from a second Trump presidency? Might we see that US consulate in the Western Saharan city of Dakhla?
Absolutely. Thank you for having me, Laura. I believe that Moroccan-U.S. relationship is going to know a revival, and especially because Trump had a very good relationship with Morocco. It goes back to 1992 when Donald Trump met with King Hassan II, and now, and especially when he was in office, he recognized the U.S. Recognized Morocco's sovereignty over the Western Sahara. And I think that we will see more partnerships, more cooperation, especially because now Morocco has proved to be a regional power in West Africa. I mean, in terms of the industry, in terms of making vehicles, in terms of even agriculture and energy projects, Morocco is taking the lead on that. And I believe that the United States will see that as a huge asset, and we'll see Morocco as a very important partner, especially to counter Iranian influence, which Israelis have also been been trying to tackle, as well as China that has been expanding its involvement drastically in Africa. So I believe that we will see not just a consulate, but we will see much more partnerships.
Well, Morocco certainly seems to be cultivating its global partnerships right now. We just had the French President Emmanuel Macron in Morocco, where he also strengthened French support for Morocco's claim over Western Sahara. Is Morocco hoping that other countries will now follow suit?
I believe so. I think that the French recognition is really a game changer. It's important to remember that the French did not really want to go all in because they were doubtful about how to appease, I would say, Algeria. Algeria has been a long partner for France for a very long time, and there were really concerns about how to balance that relationship. But as I said, Morocco is now a real regional power, and France cannot overlook that, especially since France has withdrew drastically its involvement in Africa. But French businesses, French companies still see Africa as very important for their endeavors. And this is where Morocco becomes a real portal for all of these opportunities. And I think that these are the calculations that Macron had in mind when he visited.
And what about relations with Israel then? Because it has been complicated for some countries in the region to deepen partnerships with Israel, given the ongoing war with Hamas. What is your outlook there?
Oh, you're absolutely right, Laura. I think that that many Arab countries will, quite frankly, uncomfortable with their relationship with Israel, despite the fact that it was a U.S.-led effort to normalize relationships. The Abraham Accords didn't know a revival, didn't know that kind of dynamism that the Trump administration wanted to start. So I think that now we will see the Trump administration much more eager to expand the Abraham Accords and to not have just normalization agreements, but expand into a bigger cooperation where U.S. allies in the Gulf and in North Africa can cooperate with Israel. The Biden administration didn't even want to use the term Abraham Accords. It made it a political battle. They call it the normalization accords. Their position regarding the Netanyahu's government made all Arab countries very uncomfortable with the relationship with Israel. So they tried to very carefully maintain their relationship with Israel. But I think that now that Trump won the elections, we will see a kind of dynamism regarding that.
Okay, Zeynep, great to talk to you. Thank you very much, Zeynep Riboua there.
Thank you.
Ruth Wasserman and Ariel Osseran with me in the studio. Ruth, you were formerly on the Abraham Accords caucus in the Knesset. Are you hopeful that Trump can get it restarted again?
Absolutely. I think he puts it as a very significant aspect in his political objectives, and I think that he would want to see that. I think that also as part of stabilizing the West Bank, Gaza, and the Palestinian arena, he will want to see a more active role for the Saudis and for the Emiratis in stabilizing the entire arena.
And Ariel, we were seeing joint defence drills between Israel and Morocco at one point, weren't we? But obviously everything's not been on ice, but it has cooled down a lot since the war with Hamas.
Look, I think the second wave of Abraham Accords, if it is going to happen, will be led by Saudi Arabia. But with the foreign minister Faisal bin Farhan saying this week that such plans are off the table for normalization with Israel, I think that is one of the reasons why Trump wants to push for the end of the wars. Saudi Arabia knows that as long as the images coming out of Gaza continue to appear on the screens of Arab televisions elsewhere in the region on a daily basis, they cannot move forward publicly with such a diplomatic step with Israel. I think it was during Prime Minister Netanyahu's speech at the UN General Assembly when he talked about the possibility for normalization with Saudi Arabia, and the director of that broadcast showed an empty Saudi delegation. That shows where the situation stands now. I think Trump hopes that he can change that, but first what Israel will need to do is to end the wars and to end the daily images of death and destruction coming out from Gaza before the Saudi kingdom can move anywhere closer to normalization with Israel.
Okay, thank you both. Well, Turkey's trade minister says that he's hoping for lower tariffs on Turkish goods under an incoming President Trump. The Turkish currency, the lira, rallied on the news of a Trump win. Or to talk more about the reaction to a Trump victory in Turkey, we're joined now by Yusuf Erim. He's the editor-at-large at TRT World. Good to have you back with us, Yusuf. Good to see you. And first off, the personal relationship between Donald Trump and Recep Tayyip Erdogan, it kind of swung, didn't it, between mutual admiration and sometimes open hostility. I think Trump threatened to destroy the Turkish economy a couple of times. So what are the expectations for a second term?
I think the expectations are very optimistic right now. And when we look at the 4 years of the Biden administration, we didn't see one top-level proper bilateral between Biden and Erdogan. And Erdogan's the leader that responds very positive to leadership diplomacy. And the Biden administration wanted to institutionalize the relationship. And that's not really how you get things done with the Turks. So I think it's going to be very welcome to see President-elect Trump coming back in. He has a very warm relationship with Erdogan. Erdogan was one of the first leaders to congratulate Trump on his election victory. And I see a lot of opportunities to improve the relationship going forward in the next 4 years under a Trump administration.
It was interesting to hear the Turkish ministers talking about tariffs and that they are hopeful that Trump will reduce tariffs on Turkish goods because the incoming president has made tariffs a central plank of his economic policy, hasn't he?
Well, we have to realize that there's very high inflation in the United States. That's one of Trump's major campaign promises, was to lower inflation. And I think that looking at Turkish goods, especially high quality, low prices, lowering some tariffs on some of the key products that are used for consumers, that are used as part of the supply chain, I think will be very important, and that will fit into his promise of lowering inflation.
Trump has said he wants to end wars, and his priority is ending the war between Russia and Ukraine. Does this present an opportunity for Ankara, do you think, in that President Erdogan has chosen to be neutral, more or less, in the conflict?
I think it definitely presents an opportunity. I think it's definitely something that the Turkish president will be interested in supporting as well as participating if there's room for him at the table. But when we look at the major breakthroughs in the war in Ukraine over the past 2.5 years, they've all been either Turkish brokered or brokered on Turkish soil. You have the April 2022 peace deal that was agreed upon between the Ukrainians and the Russians before it was sabotaged by certain parliamentarians and heads of state in Europe. You have the grain corridor deal, which was also signed in Ankara, agreed upon in Istanbul, So the major breakthroughs have happened with Turkish diplomacy, and that's definitely something the Turks would want to see, a war they would want to see end very, very quickly. And I also want to add Syria. I think there's a lot of opportunities for Turkish and American foreign policy to be able to cooperate and coordinate in Syria. Now, President Trump has stated very clearly that he wants a full withdrawal from Syria. Now, Turkey is having national security issues on its Syrian border with certain groups, whether it be the YPG, whether it be ISIS, and an American withdrawal like the first time during the first round of the Trump administration, that was very devastating. It wasn't coordinated. It ended up being basically a land grab by the Iranians and by the Russians. But this time around, if it's properly coordinated, the United States can leave. Turkey can fulfill its national security concerns in that region, and that void can be filled up by the Turks and not the Iranians, which would have probably caused national security issues for the Israelis as well. So it seems to be a win-win situation for Trump and two of his allies in the region.
Israel is and remains America's strongest ally in the region, and Donald Trump has been a staunch supporter of Israel throughout his first term, and it looks set to be in his second term as well. Relations between Turkey and Israel are pretty bad at the moment. President Erdogan has openly embraced Hamas. Do you think that that could be a problem looking ahead?
Look, when we look at the first round of Trump, when we look at the past 20 years of the Middle East, I would say the best period was 2019 to 2022, the last year of the Trump administration, the spillover of Trump's policies into Biden. I think it was a great time in the Middle East that we probably saw more peace, we probably saw more reconciliation, we probably saw more normalization than we have in a very, very long time in the Middle East. So I feel that Trump's policies, if he can simulate what he did the first time around, I think that his policies, his brand of pragmatism, his brand of realpolitik has a trickle-down effect into the Middle East and with Middle Eastern leaders. So I don't expect it early on in the first year of his administration, but if he can simulate what he did the first time around, I do feel that underneath his umbrella, that there could be positive developments once again in the Middle East, and we could see normalizations. But I was listening into the broadcast, and I agree with the one of the guests before me saying that right now the visuals coming out of Lebanon and Gaza need to stop, that Netanyahu needs to finish his business as quick as possible. I don't think Trump wants a spillover to inherit this problem from Biden. So if Israel can fulfill its national security concerns as soon as possible, preferably by Trump, I assume, before his administration takes office January 20th. I think that after the first year, there's going to be some room and wiggle room for many of the actors in the Middle East to be able to recalibrate their policies towards one another. I mean, after all, English parliamentarians said it best, there's no such thing as eternal enemies or eternal allies. And the game of geopolitics is constantly changing, but interests are always eternal.
Absolutely, especially in this part of the world. Yusuf, great to talk to you. Thank you very much indeed. Yusuf Erin there from TRT World. Well, how might a second Trump term affect Yemen's Houthis? They have been wreaking havoc on global shipping via their attacks in the Red Sea. Airstrikes by American, British and Israeli forces have so far failed to deter the Iranian-backed group. The Houthis themselves released a statement saying that they did not believe Trump's pledge to end the war in Gaza. Well, to talk more about that, Emily Milliken is a Yemen expert and the Associate Director at the Atlantic Council. Good to have you with us, Emily. So, I mean, trade is very central to Trump's policy. He is a very transactional president. He was in his first term anyway. He's unlikely to take kindly to terrorists attacking American ships in the Red Sea. Do you think we can expect a more robust response to the Houthis under Trump?
For sure. You know, Trump made some comments disparaging the Biden administration's strikes on Yemeni territory and on the Houthis on the campaign trail, but he has plenty of reasons for a stronger approach when he enters office. Aside from the immense cost of Houthi maritime attacks on international shipping and the importance of the U.S. economy to his voter base, Trump really perceives this inability to stop Houthi attacks on maritime traffic and also on Israeli territory as a major loss of the Biden administration. And now there's been reports that the Houthis have begun to monetize their maritime attacks. That's just giving him another reason. You know, we could see him expanding strikes, but we could also see him, you know, arming other regional actors or supporting them, such as Israel, the Saudi-led coalition, if they should decide to restart operations, or even local Yemeni forces. And
what do you make of the response from the Houthis so far? I mean, they say they don't believe Trump will end the war in Gaza. But what do you think will be going through their minds right now when they see that Trump is going to be the president in a couple of months?
I think the Houthis are very much on edge. They know that, unlike the Biden administration, Trump has really taken a much harder line on Iran. I think they're probably very nervous that we could see things like an expanded Operation Prosperity Guardian, expanded Task Force 59, which is the drone fleet that operates in the Red Sea. And also, you know, greater support for Israeli strikes on the Houthis that could hit even more, you know, some of their leaders or even weapons and other critical infrastructure.
And of course, President Biden, one of the first things that he did when he took office was to remove the Houthis from the US list of terrorist groups. You think Trump will have no trouble putting them back there?
For sure. I think we can expect President Trump to reinstate the Houthis foreign terrorist organization designation shortly after entering office. You know, the Trump administration is well aware of the potential backlash of this FTO designation, like humanitarian aid concerns and also the lack of Houthi financial networks in the West. But reimposing an FTO designation is really a symbolic move to convey that the Trump administration will take a harsher stance against Iran and its proxies in the region. It's one of the final things that Trump did before leaving office, and also one of the first things that the Biden administration revoked when his term started. And since then, the group's ability to disrupt international shipping and threaten U.S. partners has drastically increased. Also, it can serve as a really good bargaining chip or give credit for some of the allies in the region, like Saudi Arabia and the United Arab Emirates.
Emily, great to talk to you as always. Thank you very much. Emily Milliken there. Ruth Wasserman-Land and Ariel Osseran still with me. So, Ruth, just kind of conclude what you heard from me from our guests previously on Turkey and on the Houthis. Do you see a great deal of change coming down the pipeline?
Actually, it's very interesting. First of all, the common denominator is a strong hand against the Houthis, a strong hand against the Islamic Republic of Iran with its proxies, etc. Again, there was a void of discussing Qatar. And Qatar and Turkey, in a manner of speaking, sort of are connected in some manner. And the friendship and the connection, the relationship built between President-elect Trump and President Erdogan is interesting. And here as well, I put a question mark. Where is this going to go? Is it going to go, as the previous speaker had said, under his umbrella to a more normalized relationship between Israel and Turkey?
But they had a great relationship before October 7th.
Well, they had
a good trade.
They had a very good relationship, and there was a rapprochement as well for some time. In my humble opinion, this rapprochement was very shallow and very short-lived, and owing to economic interests, very short-lived economic interests of Erdogan. I'm not talking about Turkey. I'm talking about that specific leadership of Erdogan, who is no other than a disciple of the Muslim Brotherhood, and hence his take on how funding and protection should be given to Islamic Sunni radical groups, just like Qatar.
Okay, real quick, Ariel, 20 seconds, your thoughts?
Well, Houthi leader Abdel Malik al-Houthi gave a speech today saying the results of the elections will not change their activity in the region, saying that they all Trump has achieved in the region is milking hundreds of millions of dollars from Arab nations, obviously alluding to the security deals with Saudi Arabia and support of Saudi Arabia's coalition against the Houthis in Yemen. That coalition failed. It'll be interesting to see if there'll be attempts to revive it.
Absolutely. Ariel and Ruth Wasserman-Land, thank you very much indeed.
Thank you.
Thanks.
Well, before we go, Israelis are still adapting to the new reality post-October 7th. Everything has changed, including the way art and music is created. Our Bianca Zanini has this story now of how children and music can create light out of darkness.
When the blood is on the water, the sky will open. That's the first line of Israeli artist Ohav Givati's song, The Sky. Written years ago, the song deals with issues of post-trauma based on experiences from the artist's own life. It became a hit song in Israel as part of the Project Invisible album, which works on raising awareness for veterans. But after October 7th, the song felt more relevant than ever, and Ohav was looking for a way to bring it to life again. The Mifal HaPais Council for the Culture and Arts has launched a project called Aquarium, which provides an intimate stage for musicians to perform and record their work. From famous veteran artists to young creators in the beginning of their careers, Aquarium offers an online archive of Israeli contemporary music for free for anyone to listen. So when Ohav was invited to perform, he knew it had to be with a new version of Sky. In the aftermath of the October 7th massacre, Ohav wrote and recorded a song with the children from the Gaza border communities. Many of them had lived through or been directly affected by the attack. He saw how the music helped the children heal.
Yo.
This time, Ohav invited a choir of children from another kibbutz in Israel.
So for this particular song, the first thing I did is to explain them the meaning of the song, what they sing about, because I think the first thing, and it's super important to understand what are the lyrics that you sing. So I explained to them, and I saw that they're really connected to the meaning of it, and it was important for me because it's tough word to sing the word blood, when the blood on the water. It's something difficult to sing.
The children say they had a lot of fun recording, but that they understand the seriousness of the issue too.
He explained the message of the song to us. It talks about people with post-trauma. There are many words in the song with different meanings, but the reason they wrote the song is to raise awareness for those who suffer from traumas from the attack. But I don't know the meaning of every single word.
I know what post-trauma means. Should I explain it? It's something that you can see in your eyes, but it's not a physical injury, it's mental, and it can stay with you all your life. And when you see specific things, it's really hard for you. It brings us joy to record the song, but other people can also see and understand that they are not the only ones who have post-trauma.
I think will be like a prayer, like we pray for a better world for them, that they will grow in a better world with less pain, less suffering, and that we all together as a nation, as a people, will be able to grow up, to grow from this tragedy that happened to us.
Lovely music there. Well, do stay with us here on I24 News. Kalev Ben-David will be up next with the rundown. Good night.
Shalom. ¿Qué me trae por aquí? La necesidad impostergable de 600 millones de hispanoparlantes que ahora necesitan escuchar el mensaje judío e israelí en tiempos difíciles. ¿Cómo lograrlo? Cuento con ustedes para continuar llevando a lo más alto del mundo mediático una inquebrantable diplomacia pública al servicio de la verdad sin concesión alguna.
Finish.
99.
Want to stay on top of the news no matter where you are?
Introducing I24 News' brand new news website.
On our website, you'll find all the latest articles, interviews, and live broadcasts. Everything you need to know right at your fingertips, whenever you want it.
So what are you waiting for? Download the I24 News app today.
This is the rundown on I-24 News. I'm Khaled Ben David. With his victory now secure, U.S. President-elect Donald Trump has reportedly begun assembling his new administration as he prepares to enter the White House on January 20th. Here in Israel and throughout this region, there is particular interest in who Trump will pick to fill key diplomatic and defense posts. Will they come from the more hawkish or the more isolationist wings of the Republican Party? Will those chosen for positions that specifically deal with Israel have the strong Jewish and pro-Israel backgrounds of those who served during his first term? Well, Trump's picks will be the first real indications of how he plans to conduct U.S. policy in the Middle East over the next 4 years. For more, let's go to our senior U.S. correspondent, Mike Wagenheim in Washington, D.C. Mike, we should mention, we heard U.S. President Joe Biden make his, I guess it's sort of a concession speech, as it were, promising he'll do everything possible to help Trump in that transition. You're there at the State Department, reportedly already. There's someone working to fill those key positions in state and possibly defense as well.
No doubt whatsoever, the ball is rolling on a lot of these selections right now, and some names keep popping up, not just for one position, but for multiple positions. One of the names we keep hearing again and again is Rick Grinnell. Grinnell was the U.S. ambassador to Germany and courted some controversy under the Trump administration for being highly critical of the then German government. Grinnell was also involved in talks and negotiations between the U.S., Serbia, Kosovo, and Israel on a better alignment between Serbia and Kosovo, who continued to be at each other's throats. That was the deal that brought about Kosovan recognition of Israel and vice versa, and also brought about Serbia and Kosovo's recognition of Hezbollah as a terrorist entity. He was key in those negotiations. He's being run up the flagpole for both Secretary of State and potentially National Security Advisor. There are some other names being bandied about for Secretary of State, including Senator Marco Rubio of Florida, about as pro-Israel as you can get. Certainly in Trump's good graces at this point in time, although they had a rivalry 8 years ago when Trump ran. But Rubio has stayed on Trump's good side, which is 90% of the battle when you're dealing with Trump, and his name being floated out there as a potential candidate for Secretary of State. Also being mentioned right now, Robert O'Brien. He was Trump's final national security advisor among many. He's been relied upon by Trump in his post-White House days for guidance, trusted source for Trump on matters of foreign policy, matters of national security, and still very much entrenched within Trump world there. Meanwhile, for Defense Secretary, we learned today Senator Tom Cotton of Arkansas, who would have been a front runner for the Secretary of Defense post, has turned it down. He said he wants to run for a leadership position within the Senate, probably trying to bide his time there and keep a higher media profile, I would imagine, than the Pentagon would allow. So Cotton apparently turning down consideration for the post of Secretary of Defense. That's a big surprise. And Cotton, by the way, a humongous ally of Israel. I don't think there's a day that goes by that he's not involved in the Middle East in some way, in a pro-Israel capacity. Other names being thrown out there for multiple positions, possibly Bill Hagerty, senator from Tennessee. He's only in his first term. However, he's kind of jumped up in the ranks pretty quickly in terms of his foreign policy bona fides. He was on the Foreign Affairs Committee in the Senate right from the get-go, which is rare for a rookie senator to be able to have that kind of clout. Has stayed enmeshed in foreign policy and is being considered as well for Secretary of State. Somebody, by the way, both looking at as a potential Secretary of State or Defense Secretary, Mike Waltz, congressman from Florida. He's joined us on a number of occasions. Waltz is that rarity that's on the big three committees within the House: Foreign Affairs, Intelligence, and Armed Services. He's a former Green Beret, looked upon very favorably within the House, looked upon very favorably within the Republican caucus, in Trump's good graces as well. And Waltz could be a serious candidate for both of those positions, depending on who the competition is right now. A few other names out there right now: Mike Pompeo for a possible return to a cabinet position. Probably would not be Secretary of State, but maybe Defense Secretary. Remember, he also served as the head of the CIA under Trump, and so he has multiple vantage points for that particular position. Keith Kellogg, who was Trump's executive secretary and chief of staff of his National Security Council. He also served as National Security Advisor to Mike Pence, though that didn't seem to hurt him with Trump. Trump. I think that was by mutual consent. Kellogg has been relied upon as well by Trump during his post-White House years for guidance, for counsel, for advice on matters of national security, and he looks to be among the front runners for one of those coveted positions. And by the way, this transition and these selections are being headed up by Howard Lutnick. Lutnick is a major Trump donor, a friend to Trump for a long time now, and among the highest level Jewish donors there are. Lutnick about as pro-Israel as they come. Will that be taken into consideration when these selections are made? I guess it couldn't hurt that he has that particular posture, Kalev.
Right. And Mike, I think these are all figures that certainly the Israeli government or the current Israeli government would be comfortable with. We don't have any Rex Tillersons there that are less known figures. But is there any way to read about how we're also hearing, for example, one spokeswoman, Elizabeth Pipko, for the Republicans, saying Donald Trump wants to see these wars wrapped up. We keep hearing that. When he takes office, Brian Hook talking about saying that Donald Trump does not want to see regime change in Iran. Any possible way to read which directions Donald Trump might go in a second term by some of these selections, some of these names being bandied about?
It's interesting you bring that up because you look at a character like Rick Grinnell. He has been much more toward the Trump isolationist wing than I think a lot of those other characters, a lot of those other veterans within the Trump administration are. He has been going against the grain from most of the Republican Party on matters of Ukraine. He's pitched, possibly establishing an autonomous zone in eastern Ukraine, which the Ukrainian government is dead set against. So he's been much more in line with Trump when it comes to matters of policy within Europe, specifically with Ukraine and Russia. Most of the other names we're talking about, Robert O'Brien, Mike Pompeo, names like that, much more in line with the more traditional Republican views on foreign policies in terms of when to use diplomacy and when to use force. So I'm not so sure this White House is going to be stacked with those hardcore isolationists like one might expect. I think we're going to have a mix maybe of some of the newer people who fall in line with Trump on matters of staying out of wars essentially at all costs, and those more traditional Republicans that have been in the establishment now for decades who bend more toward the orthodoxy. By the way, one other thing, Kalev, one name that's being thrown out there right now, since we're at the State Department, for ambassador to the United Nations is Elise Stefanik. I just saw a letter from Stefanik, 45 minutes ago, saying that she's running for House Republican leadership. But at the same time, I think she's keeping her options open to become ambassador to the United Nations. Stefanik, again, very pro-Israel in her policies, in her rhetoric, gives constant statements about what she feels is the Biden administration's disalliance, if you can call it that, with Israel. So I think Stefanik, in the mold of maybe a Nikki Haley, would be a good proponent for Israel at the United Nations. But sure, again, just a name being thrown out there right now.
Right, and of course she led the charge against universities allowing these anti-Israel, anti-Semitic protests on campus. So she would be certainly welcomed by the Jewish community there in the U.S. Mike Wagenheim there at the State Department. Thank you for that. And joining us is Dr. Michael Oren, Ambassador Michael Oren, the former Israeli ambassador to the U.S., former deputy minister and Knesset member, our Middle East correspondent Ariel Oseran. And joining us from Jerusalem, we have Dr. Dan Diker, president of the Jerusalem Center for Security and Foreign Affairs. Michael, I want to start with you, and first of all, get your impression about what we've just heard, the team putting together, and in what way we'll break down some of the more individual aspects of Donald Trump's policy towards Israel and the Middle East in the course of the show. But let's just start with a more general take on what maybe this region and Israel can expect coming up.
Well, let's say at the outset that in contrast to Trump's first term, when there were a lot of offices that were left vacant for a long time, they couldn't get a lot of people to fill the spaces, and now I think there's a waiting line. And the transition team has a very long list of possible candidates. Mike Wagner measured some of them, and some of them I know quite well. Lisa Stefanik was my student, believe it or not, many years ago. I'm that old. And I wish her well. She'd be a great ambassador to the United Nations, great ambassador. And some of these people are all fine. What is true almost across the board And you mentioned it, you know, basically, Kalev, that there's no Rex Tillerson this time. There's no someone here who's going to be problematic for the state of Israel. It's going to be either to be someone like Marco Rubio, or maybe Tom Cotton doesn't want that position. But these are all people who have very strong pro-Israel bona fides. Now, that can be interpreted certainly as strong diplomatic and security support for Israel, but there are going to be limits. People tend to forget here that it was Donald Trump who opposed the annexation of Area C by an earlier Netanyahu government. I worked on the Trump peace plan. I was an advisor to that peace plan. Make no mistake about it, it was a two-state peace plan. And Mr. Trump was not particularly enthusiastic about settlement building. So there will be limits to this, and maybe some of the people today in Israel who are celebrating that this is going to bring about the annexation of the West Bank, I think they're being overconfident.
Right. Let me go to Dan Diker, and let's also get your view on that, and maybe look at, for example, one pretty particular pressing issue for Israel, the Iran file, Dan, as it applies, because we are already starting to hear comments from some of these people relating to Iran.
Well, I think Ambassador Oren makes a number of very important points, and I think the key word here, Kalev, is context. President Trump of 2016 advanced the deal of the century, and since his term in 2024, we have World War III of the century, and we had the ultimate mass murder of the century on October 7th, 2023. So the context for the president's victory and his last four-year term is fundamentally different. And the Iranian octopus, the Iranian regime, clearly behind all the subversion across the Middle East, not just for Israel, will complicate what was known as the deal of the century, which in my view is not relevant anymore since the 7th of October, because I think it's very clear to everyone in Israel, every one of the nearly 10 million citizens of Israel and the 350 million Arabs across the Middle East that jihad is the religiously, ideologically motivated a war against Israel by Iran and its terror proxies. So that is the reality that President Trump and his advisors are going to face. So the notion that he says he is a president that wants to end all wars, he does not want to inherit. He doesn't want to inherit the war in Gaza, nor does he want to inherit the war against Hezbollah in Lebanon, nor Iran. But Iran may have different plans for the president.
Well, let's take a look at, since we're talking about Iran, of course, when he is going to come office at a time when that former shadow war between Israel and Iran has now intensified into direct attacks with each other, with the U.S. playing a direct role in helping defend the Jewish state. The next air attack from Iran, some say, could come possibly in the next few days. The U.S. forces reportedly deployed at least a dozen F-15E fighter jets to the region, aiding to the B-12 bombers and THAAD air defense systems already sent here. Meanwhile, Iran's supreme leader, the Ayatollah Khamenei, today struck his usual belligerent note speaking in Tehran. Let's take a listen.
Hezbollah is strong, and it's fighting, yes, prominent characters like His Excellency Hassan Nasrallah and Hashem Safieddin, and the likes are no longer among them. But the group with its men and its spiritual strength, Hezbollah, is there, thank God. And the enemy hasn't been able to overcome this organization, and it won't be, God willing. And the world in the region will see the day when the Zionist regime is clearly defeated by these fighters in the path of Allah.
Michael, President-elect Trump has said he wants to end wars, not get involved in them. But if he takes office during this period of escalation with Iran, one has to wonder how much he's going to be influenced by events here.
Well, let's begin by saying this, that Israel is going through a very perilous period right now. Between now and January 20th, the day of inauguration, Iran may think it's the last window that they have to break out and create a nuclear weapon. Because once Trump is sworn in, they probably won't have that opportunity again, and I think they know it. Having said that, we still have a president in the United States known as Joe Biden. And we don't know whether the Joe Biden of November 7th or 8th is the same Joe Biden of November 4th. Biden dispatched 6 B-52 bombers to the Middle East. The B-52 bomber has no defensive operations. It's a purely offensive weapon that flies at 50,000 feet and drops a 30,000-pound bunker-busting bomb. All right? It's a very clear message. And an F-15 can take down a drone, but an F-52, a B-52 cannot. It has one purpose, and that's to blow up Iranian nuclear facilities. So I wouldn't rule out the fact either, the possibility, that Joe Biden, who is obligated to nobody at this point, and only to history, may want to go down in that history as the person who ended the Iranian nuclear threat.
Well, that's a big claim, Ariel. That
Ariel's rolling his eyes. Let's see what he thinks.
I want to get your response. I mean, there is a theory that President Biden was sort of handcuffed by the election, and that the need for Kamala Harris and not to do an action like that could upset the sort of more liberal side of the Democratic or progressive side. But as I said before, that would be a pretty big change in U.S. policy, to say the very least.
Look, there's hitting the Iranian nuclear program through bombs, and then there's destroying it militarily. I think the latter is very far or not on the table at the moment. There are so many ladders of levels in the ladder of escalation between Israel and Iran that there's still a long ways to go till we reach there. But there were thoughts, maybe perhaps in Israel's response to the October missile strike, that it would end up going for the military sites or even nuclear program. It didn't end up doing that. It received in exchange the THAAD missile defense system. And if Biden does give Israel the green light to go for Iran's nuclear sites, it will indeed immediately escalate the current situation. And Trump ran on the de-escalation ticket. And so I don't think that Biden will set the stage for raising escalation as he leaves office. I think what he will do is take steps to ensure the defense, the protection of America's allies, whether it's Israel or Ukraine, given that Trump and his team is saying that they want to end all the wars in the Middle East and the war in Ukraine, and that has many in Kyiv concerned.
Let me get Dan Diker's view on that. And by the way, Brian Hook, who's supposedly overseeing the transition, has said that the Trump administration does not want regime change in Iran. And Trump himself has talked about a deal with Iran. But of course, what President-elect Trump says and that ends up doing sometimes doesn't always correlate. Dan, your take on that?
Caleb, one of the major risks, and may I say errors in discussing in Western discourse on the Middle East and on Iran is a lack of cultural context. In the Middle East, there is no such thing as de-escalation. In the Middle East, there's something called the strong horse. That's the 700-year, since Ibn Khaldun wrote about it. The famous Arab Muslim historian and political theorist wrote about 700 years ago. There's a notion of victory and there's a notion of defeat. And the Iranian regime has been at war with the United States-led Western alliance since 1979. Remember that term, death to America? Well, that's very much alive and well and kicking. And many people think that this is, a tit for tat between Israel and the Iranian regime. It's really not. This is really a war that's been foisted against the United States and its key ally, Israel. And the Iranian regime has been very sophisticated in its disinformation campaign in order to try to isolate Israel as being, and the Palestinian issue, by the way, which it is exploiting in order to try to engineer international consciousness and perception. But at the end of the day, there really is no choice for the leader of the free world than to defeat the Iranian regime and trigger, at some point, regime change, which 90% of the Iranian people favor. And that is what will ultimately de-escalate the conflict, is victory and regime change in Iran.
All right, but I don't know, not necessarily President-elect Trump, who may follow that path. There is an old saying that the personal is political, and for sure one person that applies to is Donald Trump. His warm, close relationship with Benjamin Netanyahu during his first term was certainly reflected in the many steps, some unprecedented, that Trump took in support of Israel. But after leaving office, Trump's relationship with Netanyahu became, well, let's just say it's complicated. More on that in this report from Guy Azriel.
Mr. President, The citizens of Israel are waiting for you with open arms.
The ties between Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu and President-elect Donald Trump may be a rare political partnership that has led to a series of extraordinary achievements in ties between Israel and the U.S. But when it comes to these two gentlemen, nothing is taken for granted. On Wednesday, Netanyahu became the first international leader to congratulate the next president of the United States and his wife. Dear Donald and Melania Trump, congratulations on history's greatest comeback. Your historic return to the White House offers a new beginning for America and a powerful recommitment to the great alliance between Israel and America. This is a huge victory.
We are informed that President Trump has decided to move the United States Embassy to Jerusalem.
The recognition of Jerusalem as the capital of Israel, the transfer of the American embassy, recognition of Israeli sovereignty over the Golan Heights, the deal of the century plan to resolve the Israeli-Palestinian conflict, and of course, the signing of the Abraham Accords are, among other reasons, the direct result of the special relationship and cooperation between these two leaders.
President couldn't have been more explicit in his support for our right of self-defense. Thank you.
Unlike Netanyahu's frosty and tense relationship with Barack Obama or his complicated ties with Joe Biden, the ties between the Israeli Prime Minister and the new president-elect are seen as warm and personal.
President Trump is a very great friend of our country, a leader who has done things that haven't been done before, decisions that should have been taken before by the virtue of justice and truth.
But as in any relationship, and especially one with Donald Trump, moments of crisis may not only cloud the ties between the two leaders, but also adversely affect the cooperation between the two countries.
Congratulations, President Joe Biden, on your historic inauguration.
One of the peaks of tension between the two men came 4 years ago when Netanyahu called to congratulate Joe Biden on his victory in the presidential election against Trump. Trump, who refused to admit defeat, was disappointed by what he saw as betrayal. Another low point in the relationship between the two men came when the commander of the Iranian Quds Force, Qasem Soleimani, was eliminated.
President Trump should be congratulated for acting swiftly, boldly, and resolutely against this terrorist in chief.
I'll never forget that Bibi Netanyahu let us down. That was a very terrible thing, I will say that. So we were disappointed by that, very disappointed, but we did the job ourselves, and it was absolute precision, magnificent, beautiful job. And then Bibi tried to take credit for it. That wasn't good. That didn't make me feel too good, but that's all right.
Despite the tensions and the disappointments between the two, it seems that Netanyahu has managed to find his way back to the heart of the 47th president. During a visit to the U.S. in July, the two met for the first time since the post-election crisis, and what was seen as a public expression of support for Trump. Since then, and throughout the past several months, the relationship has been maintained.
So I had a very nice call with him. He called me up yesterday morning. We talked. I congratulated him on obviously doing a very good job keeping Israel safe. He's doing very well. He calls me on occasion. I think he wants my views on things.
Ahead of Trump's 4 more years in office, and with Netanyahu's strengthened coalition, the relationship between these two is expected to play a major role in shaping the future of the Middle East in the coming years.
Dan Diker, earlier you spoke about maybe the bigger historical currents that shape government decisions. But as we see with Donald Trump, sometimes it's personal. Sometimes the decisions he makes has to do with his relationship and maybe also how the credit that he may want, for example, in doing a deal of the century.
Clearly, Caleb, President Trump is a very strong-willed but yet emotional person who clearly demands to be given credit for decisions that he's taken, such as Qasem Soleimani. And I do think that Prime Minister Netanyahu and President Trump's views are very much aligned on the issue of Iran. We remember the pulling out of the JCPOA. We remember the expulsion of the Palestine Liberation Organization personnel from Washington, as well as the all of the moving of the American embassy to Jerusalem, the recognizing Golan Heights, and as well as his preparedness to recognize Israeli sovereignty in the Jordan Valley, which in the end didn't work out, but that led, of course, to the deal of the century, which both men were completely aligned on. I think that one thing we really have to be very mindful of is that Donald Trump is a deal maker. He wants to end conflict, end war, and maintain his first-term reputation as a strong president who prevents or ends wars. And we're simply in a totally different reality in the Middle East today that really may pose a major obstacle to Trump's sense of timing. In the Middle East, everything is patience, everything is long-term. There's no such thing as let bygones be bygones. And that is going to require Israel to dictate or to determine the narrative, particularly on the Palestinian issue, in which in the United States lawmaking community, as well as the entire political and public discourse, there's an expectation that there should be a Palestinian state very soon. That is, in Israel's view, the pathway to another October 7th.
All right. Well, again, the question is how President Trump would react to that in his second term. Dr. Dan Diker, thank you for joining us this evening. I'm going to ask Ambassador Dr. Michael Oren and Ariel Assaran to remain with us. We'll be right back in.
This broadcast is brought to you by Israel Bonds, the most direct and impactful way to support Israel. Invest now at israelbonds.com. This broadcast is brought to you by Israel Bonds, the most direct and impactful way to support Israel. Invest now at israelbonds.com.
to the rundown on I-24 News. French Foreign Minister Jean-Pierre Barrot met today in Jerusalem with Strategic Affairs Minister Ron Dermer, who, according to reports, laid out Israel's demands for a ceasefire agreement to the Lebanon conflict. Meanwhile, Hezbollah fired dozens more rockets into northern Israel, with one striking a home in the Haifa suburb of Kiryat Yam. For more, let's go to our correspondent, Zach Anders, and he's in northern Israel. And Zach, still talking about a possible diplomatic solution. The French, of course, also a player in that. But in the meantime, those rockets still raining down, not just in northern Israel, but, of course, on Haifa as well.
Yeah, that's right. The IDF telling me more than 125 projectiles from Lebanon into Israel today. What we're looking at as some of the damage north of Haifa, sets a car on fire, damage to a building. Even the ambulance service today saying some of their ambulances were damaged by shrapnel. Remarkably, no casualties reported throughout the attacks here in the north, despite some really heavy fire at times, and a source telling me that some of the projectiles that were launched, more powerful rockets involved, Hezbollah tapping into some of their different arrays. Of course, they have dozens of different models of rockets and weapons they can fire, but some are more modern and advanced than what we've seen over the last year of attacks, when it's largely these Katyusha-style Soviet old rockets. They still get manufactured and made today, but the original design dates back to the 70s and 80s. So we've noticed an uptick, and how it's been described to me is that it's because Hezbollah has been hit so hard in their missile rocket storage sites that they're starting to tap into different areas and maybe use some of the weapons they might not have wanted to use, because these are higher quality weapons and certainly could hold on to them for deep, long-range attacks. But instead, we see them using them in large-scale barrages on Haifa and into that metro area that was largely unsuccessful. The IDF saying much of that that was fired today was intercepted or did not hit their targets. On the diplomatic front, that's something we're watching again very closely, but we still see that the IDF chief of staff is hinting that this campaign could still expand. The goal here to return residents to the north, Halevi speaking to soldiers here in the north, said that is the only measure. That is the only way to know whether or not we've succeeded in Lebanon. And based on the killing of a 18-year-old teen in the fields yesterday, an Israeli teen in the agricultural fields, knowing that there are still injuries, there are still soldiers that are dying. The interpretation of Halevi's statements here in the north today is that there's still work to be done, but that there has been great success over the last month plus. They're looking to build on that. And again, he's hinting that this ground campaign could still expand, could still move farther north. But certainly the political establishment working by all accounts with Lebanese partners to try and see if there's some opportunity to get Lebanon to be a stronger partner in enforcing some of these elements here, Kalev.
All right, Zach Anders there in northern Israel. Thank you for that. Still with us in the studio, former Israeli ambassador to the U.S., Dr. Michael Oren, our Middle East correspondent Ariel Osran. And Michael, I know you personally have been particularly active in both drawing attention to the plight of those displaced residents in northern Israel. You've been active in Washington and also here in Israel trying to help out. I want to ask you about that, and also whether you see a sort of light at the end of the tunnel for them, maybe impacted somewhat by some of the developments we've been discussing.
I've been involved with the North now for over a year. It wasn't being covered by the world press, not the American media. There was no awareness in Washington. So I brought a series of delegations of displaced Israelis to Washington for meetings with both houses of Congress, both parties, and finally in the White House. All these delegations went into the White House and met with the senior staff of both the president and the vice president, and a lot of media. In between, also raising money for the North. It was appalling what the North was missing. Everything from
you
guard
worked with
positions.
Hatzalah, I believe, also.
So I'm an ambassador for Hatzalah. So we put these two together and we raised money to bring in tourniquets, to bring in oxygen tanks. I mean, really, they had nothing. And then for a period, I did military service in the North also. So I saw really firsthand what was missing. You won't believe, I would sit in meetings at these kibbutzim in the North, and you'd think you were in 1948, whether there was enough sand for sandbags and how we're going to evacuate the kids and old people if Hezbollah penetrates the border and comes out and takes over these settlements, it was quite appalling. I think the situation is improving greatly. Having said all that, I think what the reporter said was absolutely right. There will be no return of the 100,000 displaced Israelis unless they are assured that Hezbollah will not return to the border area. And maybe there are advances, maybe there's progress in the negotiations with Lebanon on applying retroactively Resolution 1701 from the Security Council of 2006, which calls on Hezbollah to redeploy north of the Litani River and have some type of international force, UNIFIL, to secure that sort of a no man's land between. It didn't work in 2006 at all. Hezbollah was immediately along the border. Maybe they can get Hezbollah to withdraw north of the Litani River. The big question is, will Israel have the right then to intercede in that area between the border and the Litani, should Israel feel that Hezbollah is once again deploying there?
Right. And Ariel, earlier we talked about the incoming Trump administration. Maybe we're picking up where we're left off on the sort of attempt at peacemaking with the Palestinians, a deal of the century. But it also looks like they're going to be looking at trying to resolve in some way the Israel-Lebanon conflict, a very intriguing figure in the Trump camp being responsible for that.
Yeah, so before we get to this interesting figure, I do just want to comment on quickly on what Ambassador Oren said, that just yesterday the Lebanese government approved budgetary appropriations for the addition of 1,500 soldiers in the Lebanese army to be deployed to southern Lebanon. So not only is the Lebanese government showing that they're putting actions to their words, this is obviously a first step. There are currently 4,500 soldiers. The government said that in order to fulfill the needs of not only pushing Hezbollah forward but dismantling the existing infrastructure, it will take between 7,000 and 11,000 soldiers to be deployed there. That's to put that aside. But if we talked earlier about the Trump team that is formulating, when we look back at the first term, first Trump presidency, the key figure leading the policy on the Middle East was Trump's son-in-law, Jared Kushner. Kushner is still engaged in business with the Saudis, but he has not really taken a prominent role, at least not in the campaign. That has been assumed by someone related to another son-in-law, but a father, not Kushner, but Masad Boulos, the father of Michael Boulos, who is the husband of Tiffany Trump. He was the coordinator for the Trump campaign for the Arab vote. He is seen as one of the key figures of that campaign who brought on the wide support of the Arab population in the United States, also the victory in Michigan. He's outlining what the Trump administration's goals are regarding the war in Lebanon, but not only. Let's take a listen to what he said just yesterday to Lebanese media.
Trump won the popular vote in a big red wave that sent a resounding message to Americans and the world. We dedicate this victory to Americans, Lebanese, and the entire world because Trump promised to end all the wars that are going on in Gaza, Lebanon, and Ukraine.
So I think that's interesting. The "and Ukraine" is very interesting. And to hear Boulos talk about this, a Christian businessman, key figure in the campaign, it wouldn't be surprising if he ends up assuming a key role regarding the Middle East in this next Trump administration. He himself said that he would be assuming the role of lead negotiator vis-a-vis Lebanon, a position currently occupied by Amos Hochstein, who will arrive back in Lebanon in the coming week to try and close what is left to be closed. But the Trump administration, or the President-elect administration, he wants to see an end of all the wars and a swift end to that. And he's also even started to work to that end. Let's hear more from Boulos.
Trump is known for keeping his promises, and if he promises something, he will fulfill it. He promised to end the war and destruction in Lebanon and to rebuild it as well. He will start working on this immediately, and he has already begun work on it today, with phone calls and discussions with world leaders.
I think we should note that President Trump yesterday, thanking various communities for their support in this election, specifically mentioned Arab Americans, who, according to some exit poll data, certainly broke with the usual Democratic ranks and gave him some support. It's not clear how.
And he didn't thank the Jews.
Yes, he did not specifically thank the
He did not specifically
Jewish, and polling indicates that he didn't get a majority support of the Jews, but it's not clear how much of really the Arab American vote. And I will say earlier, while campaigning for that vote, President-elect Trump specifically mentioned the suffering of the Lebanese people, and he wants to see it end. So clearly, this is something that the Trump administration is going to pick up on, and that's going to impact certainly on Israel's approach moving forward. Let's move now to another theater of war, as it were, the situation in the Gaza Strip. Now, with Israel under increasing pressure to allow more aid into northern Gaza, the country, Israel, has enabled over 200 Gazans, including those who are sick and their caregivers, to leave the country for medical treatment abroad. But could Israel be doing more to help civilians in the Gaza Strip, especially in the face of a looming deadline from the U.S. to do so? Joe Brown takes a closer look.
For the first time since the Gaza war began over a year ago, hundreds of ill Gazans and their caregivers have left the enclave for treatment abroad.
The people are mentally exhausted. The situation in Gaza is completely shattered. It's unbearable, intolerable. People are tired. The healthcare system has been destroyed.
231 Gazans crossed the Kerem Shalom crossing into Israel before departing from Ramon Airport in Eilat to receive treatment in the United Arab Emirates or Romania. This move was carried out in conjunction with COGAT, the Israeli unit designed to oversee civilian policy in the West Bank and Gaza, along with the World Health Organization, the European Union, and the UAE. It comes as Israel has come under growing criticism from international partners, including the US, for allegedly holding back aid into Gaza, sending in well under the agreed amount of 350 aid trucks to the Strip daily. The maximum amount Israel has sent in was 225 trucks a day in April, but in October, that number fell to an average of 13 trucks a day.
I think the situation is desperate, particularly in northern Gaza. It's northern Gaza has been strangled. The people are really, really suffering. There are not that many people left there, but those that are left there are really, really struggling.
Israel says there are issues with aid distribution into Gaza, including shipments getting hijacked from terrorists. But data from COGAT shows that aid deliveries have dropped by more than a third over the last month. Meanwhile, the IDF has said that over 1 million Gazan children have been vaccinated against polio, accounting for 90% of all Gazans under the age of 18. So with this, and the allowance of sick Gazans to leave the country for medical treatment, Israel is showing that it is still providing aid to Gazans. But, according to the international community, it is no way near enough.
Right, and we should specify the U.S. has actually had given a deadline that expires on November 13th for Israel to boost that aid or face, for example, possible restrictions on arms shipments. And if Israel's efforts to meet that and its general relations in this transition period with the United States have been complicated, of course, by the firing of Defense Minister Yoav Gallant, who was seen as really the main sort of conduit between the two countries' defense establishments. Yoav Gallant making his official farewell from the defense post today, and he definitely had some strong things to say. Ariel.
Yeah, as of 45 minutes ago, former Defense Minister Yoav Gallant, the Knesset is deliberating now to approve the appointment of his replacement, Israel Katz. But hours before this, his tenure finished, Gallant met with families of the hostages and not sparing criticism on Prime Minister Netanyahu, saying that the IDF has pretty much achieved all of its goals in Gaza. There is no real reason to remain there. This is also what I heard on the ground in Gaza from soldiers fighting there, and this was 2 months ago. So this is what Gallant is saying now, saying that the reasons for refusing a ceasefire deal have not been military nor diplomatic, alluding to the fact that they are political in orientation, saying that Netanyahu makes decisions on his own. So Gallant advised the families of the hostages to focus their pressure on Netanyahu, saying that he has split from the positions of Gallant and the defense establishment, that areas like the Philadelphia corridor Israel could have left there for 40 days, and then, if needed, it could have returned. Israel has the upper hand militarily. This is what Gallant told the hostage families, saying that they could have agreed to the deal, to the terms, but at the end of the day, the reason why there isn't a deal, at least on the Israeli side, is Netanyahu's refusal, saying that he is not hopeful because he does not see Netanyahu's intentions on this matter changing, not anytime soon.
Michael, I just want to point out Israel's Attorney General today, who has had a lot of issues with Benjamin Netanyahu and his government, today defended Benjamin Netanyahu's removal of Defense Minister Yoav Gallant in arguments before the Israeli Supreme Court. There were some civilian petitions to try to block that move. Of course, because civilian oversight of the military and a prime minister's right to choose his cabinet is enshrined illegal. It's a legal law. It was entirely legal, but was it entirely wise?
Well, first of all, a word about Yoav Gallant. I sat with him in Knesset for years. I know him personally. A fine man, a brave man, a great soldier, and I think very, very intelligent and a visionary in key ways. But a government is a government. And the Prime Minister and the government have a line. And if the Defense Minister finds that that line is unacceptable, that he can't represent that line, that he has to publicly go up against that line, then it is certainly within the purview of a Prime Minister to dismiss him. As difficult as that may be, so you have to weigh the downside of having to change defense ministers in midstream, in the middle of a war, and bringing in a new defense minister who's lacking in defense experience and military experience. That has to be said also. Or the fact that you have a defense minister actually advocating for policies that go against those of the government.
Right. Well, certainly Benjamin Netanyahu weighed those things, and he made his decision. Right. Now, the Knesset, let's move on, but certainly a related security issue. The Knesset yesterday passed a tough new law that would enable the government to expel family members of people who commit terrorist attacks if it is proved that they had advanced knowledge of the attack and failed to report it to authorities or in any way express support, sympathy, or identification with it. The bill, though, is controversial since it would apply to Israeli citizens who would be deported either to Gaza or to an undetermined destination for a period that could last up to 20 years. Now, the bill squeaked by with 61 votes, and of course the 120-member Knesset, amid strong objections from opposition lawmakers. Here's a bit of the debate in the parliament over the law.
The idea that would allow, by law, the deportation of families of terrorists is a just idea that has no equal, because the degree of justice that it not only allows but requires is the deportation of family members who knew or have known in advance about an act of terrorism by their family members and did not do what was required of them to prevent them from doing it.
This law will not prevent terrorism. What will prevent terrorism is striving to end the Israeli-Palestinian conflict. This is what will prevent terrorism, not intensifying it and making it worse, not making it bloodier and more horrible, not smearing the state of Israel everywhere in the world with destructive legislation and the lack of willingness to look at reality.
I really have nothing to say about it.
Ariel, I am old enough to recall when Israel attempted to deport Hamas terrorists.
400
right, from the West Bank.
Yitzhak
Rabin,
right.
Expel them to the Lebanon security zone, where they simply sat on the border because Lebanon refused to take them in. And of course, that ended up being something of, I would think, a fiasco, you might say. Really didn't accomplish much. Here we are talking about Israeli citizens. The law doesn't even specify how would you deport Israeli citizens to other places. What other country would take them? And we're talking about Gaza at a time when Israel basically is still controlling Gaza. So obviously, this is going to be a problematic law going forward.
Yeah, it's one of those laws that you're not sure if it's ever going to be implemented on the ground. More of a declaratory move, in my opinion, given that there are a lot of holes in this law. It's not clear if there is such a thing as Jewish terror in the state of Israel. So if a Jew commits an act of terror, will he be deported? And if so, as to your question, where will he be deported?
I would say
a Jewish terrorist be deported?
Certainly not to Gaza. Certainly not to Gaza. I would say
so,
that.
So there are many issues here. At the end of the day, Israel finds itself challenged by multi-front war, various forms of terrorism raising their heads. The issue of internal terrorism, perhaps one of the most complicated for the defense establishment to tackle, to thwart in advance. And we have seen in recent months too many of the terror attacks carried out by Israelis.
Israeli Arabs.
Israeli Arabs. Having said that, also defense experts say that they're not sure how much efficacy such a rule will have. And also, again, the question is not whether this was passed or not, but whether it will be enforced or not.
Michael, a brief
The last point is this. Israel's facing extraordinary threats. Threats that many Western states have never confronted. And in the future, it's going to require extraordinary measures. Maybe not this measure, but Israel's going to have to think out of the constitutional box, as we will, in order to defend itself.
Right. And I will add one more thing to bring it all back to the main story we started with. Benjamin Netanyahu and Donald Trump are going to have differences, I think, over certain issues, perhaps over Palestinian peacemaking. But when it comes to issues like this, what we fall into the rubric of human rights, I doubt very much that the Netanyahu government or any Israeli government is going to face the censure of a Trump administration. Israel will have a freer hand to deal with terror as it sees fit. The question is the efficacy.
I wouldn't be surprised if the Trump administration also lifts the sanctions that have been placed by the Biden administration on a number of Israelis.
You mean the so-called extremists in the West Bank?
Not just that, people who are members of what's called Tzav Shmona, who tried to prevent aid from entering Gaza.
Right. And I suspect that policy is certainly going to end with the Trump administration. I want to thank Ambassador Dr. Michael Oren and Ariel Osseron for joining us this evening. Now, the October 7th massacre and the ensuing war has changed the reality for Israel and for most Israelis. The economy, the security, the social life, everything is different now. It has also significantly impacted the art and the music being produced here. Our senior correspondent, Bianca Zanini, brings us one story of how children and music are managing to create light from a dark moment.
When the blood is on the water, the sky will open. That's the first line of Israeli artist Ohav Givati's song, The Sky. Written years ago, the song deals with issues of post-trauma based on experiences from the artist's own life. It became a hit song in Israel as part of the Project Invisible album, which works on raising awareness for veterans. But after October 7th, the song felt more relevant than ever, and Ohav was looking for a way to bring it to life again. The Mifal HaPais Council for the Culture and Arts has launched a project called Aquarium, which provides an intimate stage for musicians to perform and record their work. From famous veteran artists to young creators in the beginning of their careers, Aquarium offers an online archive of Israeli contemporary music for free for anyone to listen. So when Ohav was invited to perform, he knew it had to be with a new version of Sky. In the aftermath of the October 7th massacre, Ohav wrote and recorded a song with the children from the Gaza border communities. Many of them had lived through or been directly affected by the attack. He saw how the music helped the children heal. This time, Ohav invited a choir of children from another kibbutz in Israel.
So for this particular song, the first thing I did is to explain them the meaning of the song, what they sing about, because I think the first thing, and it's super important to understand what are the lyrics that you sing. So I explained to them, and I saw that they're really connected to the meaning of it, and it was important for me because it's tough word to sing the word blood when the blood on the water. It's something difficult to sing.
The children say they had a lot of fun recording, but that they understand the seriousness of the issue too.
He explained the message of the song to us. It talks about people with post-trauma. There are many words in the song with different meanings, but the reason they wrote the song is to raise awareness for those who suffer from traumas from the attack. But I don't know the meaning of every single word.
I know what post-trauma means. Should I explain it? It's something that you can see in your eyes, but it's not a physical injury, it's mental, and it can stay with you all your life. And when you see specific things, it's really hard for you. It brings us joy to record the song, but other people can also see and understand that they are not the only ones who have post-trauma.
I think it will be like a prayer, like we pray for a better world for them, that they will grow in a better world with less pain, less suffering, and that we all together as a nation, as a people, will be able to grow up, to grow from this tragedy that happened to us.
That is a point of light, or maybe I should say a note of hope amidst all of this darkness. That ends our broadcast for this evening. Of course, you continue to follow I-24 News on its website and various social media platforms. And thank you for joining us for this evening on The Rundown, and have a good weekend.